People with very wide experience and insight into the issue. They are Pam Tatlow, the Chief Executive of Million Plus, which represents 19 so-called modern universities. Beside her, Darren Jones, Labour MP for Bristol North West, who left the University of Bath's Advisory Board because of the Vice-Chancellor's salary of more than £450,000. Also got here with me Ryan Shorthouse, the founder and chief executive of the conservative think tank Bright Blue, who was advisor to the former university secretary David Willits. We saw him there in tomorrow's report. And Mahatir Pasha, the general secretary of the Students' Union at the LSE, the London School of Economics. Very good to see you all. We've got an awful lot to get through, so let's discuss. Can it be done in a better way? Mahatir, even under the current system, we know tens of thousands of people are still signing up at this price.
Yes, I think that's a major issue. What we have here is a system where students are having to pay incredible amounts of money, walking out with substantially high debts. But the problem is the demand for higher education will continue to go up because now we're in a climate where you can't basically get a good job without a degree. What's changed over the past few decades is that jobs that were once available, for example, Indeed. Policing or nursing, were very much available without a degree. All they're doing now is taking in people with a degree.
But you know, that point, there may be a point when people think it's not worth paying the £9,250 a year. But at this moment, they still do.
They still do, and I think that's because they have to. What I will advocate for, and I think the system fundamentally needs to change, is free education. I think education needs to be seen as a public good. And it needs to be seen
whichever way it's paid for,
right.
it's not free. We know that, don't we? Let me bring you down. I mean, it's never going to be free, is it? Because somewhere it's got to be paid for, and the taxpayer will pay if we go back to an old system. Do you think the current system is about the best we can do?
Well, remember, it's free to the student to go because they get a loan.
Sorry, Ryan. Yeah, you're down.
Yeah, sorry, Ryan. Yeah. It's free to the student. But broadly, yes, I think the current system is fair, and it has led, as David said in the clip, to more resources going to university per student, a record number of students going to university, including disadvantaged students. And remember, if your course ain't that good and you don't do that well in the labour market, the state protects you. You don't pay any of this loan back until you're earning above £21,000
So what, if you go to a rubbish course and you get a rubbish job, I mean, that's not really an incentive, is it?
I know, but as I say, you're not paying any of the money back. And then after 30 years, if it's the case that you've been on a low, middle income for that period, then the state writes it off for you. So all this idea that people are kind of straddled with debt and it's unaffordable is incorrect. The system is designed in a way that it can never be unaffordable. And I'm going to put it to Darren. Nice to see you, Darren, but I'm going to put that to you because following then through from that is, you know, somebody's got to pay somewhere. If you want to do it a different way, the point I was making to Mahatir, the general taxpayer, including, it's often been stated, but it is true, the general taxpayer, including millions of people who've never been to university or never going to go.
Well, I mean, let me just challenge the point that if you take a loan, it's not free. And for many of my constituents who end up with tens of thousands of pounds of debt in order to get the education they deserve, that is not free in their minds. I agree that education should be free for these young people. And ultimately, you know, the repayment of these loans, now with interest rates on it as well, isn't a great system. Ultimately, the state is borrowing the money in order to provide these loans to students to go. So why shouldn't the state just actually fund higher education properly?
Because the chickens are going to come home to roost maybe 30, 40, 50 years from now.
Well, chickens and eggs.
Yeah,
but actually the point is that we need to fund education properly.
There's a smoke and mirrors issue here, which is previously, before the present government, or the government in 2010, universities used to get money directly. And fees were able to be roughly about £3,000 because they were additional. The government after 2010 said from 2012 it was cutting 80% of the funding of universities. And at that point, it shifted the responsibility from the general taxpayer to students. And the question we've all got to ask ourselves, and clearly it came up at the election as well, is the system sustainable? And
well, what do you think?
And is it fair? I think there
is it sustainable?
I think there are questions to be asked if you always ask students and then graduates to pick up the tab. And your poll indicates that 2/3 of people have got questions about that. The other thing I would just make a correction about, which is the course that you quoted where you said 67% of people dropped out.
It's not one of your universities, is it?
It's Middlesex University,
Right.
and the university has actually given the information to Sky.
Right.
That was 2 students.
Oh, I see.
One of them was on it's a 4-year
That's
course.
statistics for you then,
It's a
yeah.
foundation.
So three students on it, I get it.
So
okay.
what we've got to be clear is that we don't run down universities or the quality of something.
Okay,
that
but I
people want to
just
take
want to
part in.
explore that, though. You know, Mahatir, I mean, there are some courses, and it is being said, perhaps not as extreme as that case, that do have higher dropout rates, and we are hearing from students in these satisfaction surveys saying, well, we don't think the teaching was worth it. We don't think the course was any good in the end.
Of course, and that's a major issue now. The student experience differs across universities, and some people go into universities thinking they're going to have a very different experience to what they end up resulting with. I think the big issue here is the direction the UK is heading in, and that is one of marketising education. And once we marketise education, there are going to be all sorts of problems associated with this. You spoke about it being fair. I don't think it's a fair system. Right now, we're leaving university with tens of thousands of pounds of debts. We're not getting the same level of jobs, or rather the jobs we should be expecting for being from graduating from university, and fundamentally we're producing a generation now that are going to be worse off than their parents. Yeah. What direction is this country heading when students are worse?
Which we can't even imagine now in terms of housing, investment and all kinds of things, behavioural things. Well, people will change their behaviour. Because I know you're saying that the £50,000 or whatever doesn't necessarily attach to you alone, it attaches to the state if you don't pay it off over 30 years. But psychologically, people think, my goodness me, how can I possibly put down a deposit for a house with that kind of debt?
This is nonsense. Young people from our universities, right?
It's not
young people from our universities are among the luckiest people in history and on the planet.
All right.
Okay. Graduates from our universities are paid, on average, in the labour market, much more than non-graduates. Okay, net of their student loan repayments. Okay, so the idea that they're struggling is total nonsense. As I said, they go to university, they don't pay anything. They only pay back over £21,000.
But I was on the psychological point.
Do you know the biggest reason why students drop out is financial hardship? And one of the things that we've got is we've had maintenance grants cut. Now, the
government has introduced higher levels of maintenance loans to compensate the maintenance grants. And universities should also offer bursaries and scholarships to students in hardship.
As you know,
universities do.
As you know, time is limited. I want to bring Darren in here and throw in the next idea, which is, of course, a continuation of how we all pay for it. We heard it again from Vince Cable and the Lib Dems. It's been revived. A graduate tax. All graduates, you know, as you've been saying there, Ryan, all graduates tend to earn more than the general population or those that haven't been to university. What about those that got away scot-free, got it free?
Well, look, I mean, I'm open to the idea of a graduate tax. I mean, tax is progressive anyway, so the more you earn, obviously, the more you pay in your income tax / insurance anyway. As someone that benefited from university, although on a much lower fee level, mine was at the $1,250 a year when I did it, I would be open personally to that concept. But actually, it goes back to the question of students today, what would they want to do in the future? My sense is that if you ask them that a tax on their income when they have those high levels of income would be something that's more attractive than being burdened with the tens of thousands.
Okay, no, I just want to hear from Pam, because you were making an important point.
Well, I mean, the point, if you introduce a graduate tax, it looks like a fairer or progressive system, and it might well be. But we have got graduates who will be in their 30s and 40s, who will be asked to pay more tax, and who've got the loans outstanding from their own courses and then their own children.
Okay, well, maybe something have to be
so, you know, it's a much more complicated argument.
Indeed. No, I mean, it's certainly not simple as we're finding out this evening. Ryan, you were saying?
Well, I think, you know, the IFS has said the current system is a graduate tax in all but name. If I took out a loan from the bank, a normal loan, I would have to pay whatever it is with interest, regardless of my income. That is not the case with student loans. I only pay 9% over 21 grand. Okay, so it's a completely different system. Graduates cannot struggle with that debt. It is proportionate to their income.
I mean, it has been looked at subsequently, and this is a long time ago, but some of us remember it. But we remember the poll tax, which ultimately was one of the main reasons that sunk Margaret Thatcher. But you look at it, and it seems fairer. It certainly seems fairer than council tax and many of the anomalies that are in the system. But people felt it was singling them out. And this is what you're failing to understand here with this, is this lump of money attached to you. We understand that you might not pay it back, but the perception is that it's unfair.
But the reality is that it isn't, okay? And, you know, I'm saying it's broadly fair, but there are changes that can be made. For example, the government throws the income threshold in which you repay your loans at 21 grand. It was meant to go up with average earnings. They could change that. That would be, in effect, a tax cut for people in their 20s.
Let's put it to a man, no doubt, with plenty of student debt.
Yes, exactly.
And building. I mean, would that satisfy you then?
I think this idea of talking about there not being any money, I think that was just blown completely out of the water when, in the recent election, we found out that Theresa May was able to find around £1 billion to get the DUP to get you know, coalition with her. So this idea and this sort of rhetoric that's kind of made its way into mainstream politics about austerity and money being put on the individual, I think that was completely
well, I'm glad you mentioned
undermined.
I'm glad you mentioned money here, but you know, £1 billion is a drop in the ocean compared to the size of student debt. I mean, we've had it up at the bottom of our, we call it a ticker in the bottom of our screen. I think we can put it up now. Here we go, 100 billion and counting of total student debt in the UK. I mean, Darren and your leaders threatened to wipe all that out.
Well, that's UK government debt. That's the point to remember, because students that are at university now aren't paying for this. This is on the books.
But he said he'd get rid of all student debt.
Of the Treasury. Look, all of this detail is, to be frank, hyperbole. I have constituents in Bristol who are from lower income families who are brought up in situations of economic stress because of debt, door collectors, Wonga loans, all of that type of stuff, who have the intellectual opportunity to go to university and do well in life. They see the figures attached to this and they don't go to university.
So you actually think it is acting as a champion?
This is a lie.
I know.
They do go to university.
Put the record straight then.
I'm sorry that you're lying about that, because there are a record number of disadvantaged students going. The evidence says that fees do not put off students who get the grades at 18. It is a lie.
Come and talk to my constituents. How dare you say that in a conversation with my constituents as a member of Parliament, that is a lie?
You should be saying, as a member of Parliament, you should be saying as a member of Parliament that you should go to university.
Don't say that my constituents are lying about the fact that they're not going to university because of it.
That you should say to them, it's a transformational opportunity.
Saying a lie is
their live charity.
What nobody's mentioned is that a third of students enter university when they're over 21. Everybody thinks people go when they're 18. They don't. Who has been most put off since 2012, the new system? Part-time students and students who go to university as older. And they're often from less advantaged backgrounds.
That's a very good point.
It's not the case that this is a perfect market. The really important thing here is we need well-funded, well-resourced universities. And we've got to think as a nation, well, as a country, because there are different systems in Scotland, and a much more generous student support system that's going to be introduced in Wales in terms of grants. So we've got to think as a country, how best do we invest in universities?
Especially given what the country's going through and the reskilling we need to do.
This is one of our biggest export industries. We're a wonderful success, and at the moment the dialogue is in
I'm going to come back to you, Pam,
down.
because we've got to touch on this other issue. I want to hear it from Mahatir. What about the amount that some of these vice-chancellors are paid, and the size of the pension fund for lecturers and others? 17 billion hole in it, we're here. Do you think that's taking money away from the students?
Look, I think pay inequality, it's always a problem, but I think we shouldn't take our eyes off the real prize here, and that is the way we're heading in terms of higher education. We are marketizing it, and this problem of pay is actually only a symptom of a wider problem, and that is the fact that we're heading towards a process of marketization. So I think this idea of focusing on the pay on the pay of directors is actually a distraction.
Interesting you say that. So what? Someone being paid, a vice-chancellor being paid nearly £500,000 doesn't bother you?
No, of course it bothers me, but that's not the point here. The point is that I think this argument has conveniently propped up when the government is making huge changes to higher education, and I think they're actually trying to divert.
It's a bit of a smokescreen. Nevertheless, it caused you to resign from the board of Bath, was it?
Yeah, Bath Court, which I'm on ex officio as a Bristol MP. I mean, look, I don't think it's for MPs to decide on the pay of vice-chancellors, to be clear on that point, but, you know,
It doesn't look good, though, does it?
Well, it doesn't look good, but also I'm the voice of my constituents in Parliament, right? And they say to me, why am I taking on all this debt and paying this interest for vice-chancellors to have enormous pay when that's just not acceptable. That's not what they're paying for. And actually, it's not about lecturers and academic staff. It's generally about vice-chancellors. And you need to look at the base pay plus the benefits and the perks and the expenses and the other roles that they do in other organisations as well. Yeah. And ultimately, I just think there's a better value for money argument.
You make a very good point there, though, don't you? I mean, because I bet, Pam, you know, half the lecturers and tutors are, let's say, not too pleased about it as well. They're not exactly the best paid people.
Well, you know, vice-chancellors' pay is set by remuneration committees, and they...
not our responsibility, Gov.
No, hear me out. And we've got lots of private sector representatives on it who actually look at what vice-chancellors have had to manage in terms of the changes in the system and say, actually, this looks more like a private enterprise. I'm not here to defend any particular level of pay. There are 3 vice-chancellors who are paid over £400,000 a year. The average pay in the sector is £260,000. Now, I've got to say that for some people, that will look like an enormous amount of money.
We're nearly out of time.
We shouldn't.
I think you've had your chunk. I'm not sure Ryan has. Ryan, do you think the Chancellor will do something in the budget? Do you think he will do something, perhaps, with that indexing you were talking about?
I think he should do that because that would help graduates, young graduates in their 20s and 30s, who some of them do struggle with the cost of living, and that would give them more money in their pocket if he raised the repayment threshold. On vice-chancellors, I think they're running charities and public services. It's outrageous that vice-chancellors' pay has rocketed in the last 7 or 8 years, while the average academic staff has gone down. So I think the Chancellor will take steps to ensure that vice-chancellors are not fleecing the system.
Very interesting. We're out of time. I'm so sorry. I think it's been a brilliant discussion, although I'm marking my own scorecard here. Thank you all very much indeed. Mahatir, Ryan, Darren and Pam, very good to see you all. And you're watching Sky News Tonight. Coming up, Ryanair is to